The nurse told him he couldn't stand during the anthem. But when the music started, the man with no legs stood anyway. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And if this kind of story speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe. They wheeled him into room 218 just after sunrise. The Sycamore Veterans Rehabilitation Center was still coming to life. Cafeteria lights buzzed to life, laundry carts echoed in the hallways, and the smell of floor wax lingered in the air. Nurses murmured shift change notes. Somewhere, a television played an old war documentary, volume too low for anyone to hear. Walter. Pierce didn't look around. He'd seen hospitals before, field ones, combat ones, and now this one. He didn't wear medals, didn't carry a photo, but the olive-green jacket on his shoulders had creases like riverbeds, and the patch just above the heart was faded to near invisibility. 2 silver wings, 1 airborne stripe. The intake nurse, a young woman named Lexi, tried to be cheerful. Morning. Mr. Pierce, you're our new neighbor in 218, huh? Call me Walter, he muttered, his voice dry like leaves in winter. She glanced at his file. Double leg amputation, post-traumatic arthritis, PTSD, minimal speech. She didn't know the full story. No one did. The records were redacted, the operations classified, but the scars weren't. She led him through the corridor, decorated with framed photos of smiling vets and flags, and parked him in his room. He didn't ask for a tour. You'll be comfortable here, she said. Sunlight in the mornings, good view of the courtyard. He said nothing, but his eyes, sharp and pale, were locked on one thing, the flagpole. That's important, he finally muttered. I want to face that every day. She nodded slowly, made a note. Didn't ask why. The next morning, the center ran its usual routine. Breakfast trays, medication carts, light physical therapy. And at exactly 0800 hours, a speaker in the ceiling clicked and crackled. Then came the anthem. Every day it played. Most residents didn't react. Some rolled over in bed. Others glanced toward the window. But not Walter. Walter sat straight. Back, like iron, hands tight on the chair's arms. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. He stared at the flag as it rose into the wind. Day after day, the staff noticed. So did other vets. But no one said a word. They respected it, even if they didn't fully understand it. Until Tuesday. That morning, Nurse Lexi came in early, flustered, papers in hand. She forgot the time, didn't notice the music starting. Walter, we've got your therapy assessment now. Let's get going. She reached for his wheelchair. Don't, he said flatly. It's just PT, she replied. You can't. Stand anyway, sir, let me help. But he was already shifting. The anthem swelled, and with veins bulging in his arms and every muscle trembling, Walter Pierce began to rise. He had no legs. But somehow, that morning, he stood. The silence after he stood was louder than the anthem had ever been. Lexi froze mid-step, clipboard sliding from her hand and landing with a hollow slap on the linoleum floor. She blinked, half expecting her mind to correct what she was seeing. But Walter Pierce, double amputee, declared permanently non-weight-bearing, was vertical, unsupported. He stood on the strength of his arms, locked elbows pressing into the handles of his chair, back rigid like a soldier called to attention. It didn't last long. 8, maybe 9 seconds. But it was enough. Enough for the head nurse passing by to stop cold. Enough for the veteran in room 215 across the hall to whisper a stunned, "No way." Enough for the receptionist to look up from the front desk and mutter, "Is the anthem still playing?" And when Walter finally eased back into his seat, arms shaking, lips pursed, sweat lining his brow, he didn't say a word. He just nodded once at the window, at the now fully raised flag. Then he turned away. Lexi crouched beside him, speechless. She was trained in emergency response. Stroke signs, trauma triggers, oxygen collapse, but not for this. "Why?" she started, voice quiet. "Why would you?" Because I still can, he said. And that was it. He didn't explain more, didn't offer a story, a metaphor, or a lecture about patriotism. He just asked for water and a cool towel. And when the center's director came rushing in minutes later, half panicked, half awestruck, Walter said calmly, "Let's not make a show of it. Just give me a new set of gloves. These are worn thin." Word spread anyway. By lunch, the entire first floor had heard. By evening, the administrator had already received 3 voicemails from local reporters asking about the veteran miracle at Sycamore. A blurry phone video, taken by a tech down the hall, had already reached 20,000 views online under the title, "Double Amputee Vet Stands for Anthem." Without legs. Walter didn't have a social media account. He didn't own a smartphone. He didn't even like having a TV in the room, said the commercials were louder than combat zones. But by the next morning, he was a name again. Not just a room number, not just a file. People started knocking before entering his room. Some brought coffee. Some just wanted to shake his hand. A few sat quietly beside him during the 800 anthem, not saying a word, just sharing in the moment. It was Lexi who finally asked the question burning on everyone's mind. "What happened to your legs?" Walter stared at her for a long moment. "Landmine, Kandahar, 2009. She nodded slowly, unsure what to say next. But he kept going, voice quiet, almost rehearsed. "3 of us. I was the only one who lived. They gave me a medal. I buried it with their names." Lexi looked at his hands. Thick, scarred, built like they'd once bent steel. She realized he wasn't standing out of pride. He was standing for them. The anthem the next day was different. Walter asked the nurse to open the window. As the flag rose, so did he. Again. Slower this time, less steady, but taller somehow. And this time, when he lowered himself back into the chair, he whispered, "2 more to go." Lexi didn't understand. Not yet. But she would, because Walter Pierce had 1 more mission left. And standing up was just the beginning. Walter didn't speak much that day. He spent most of the afternoon polishing the frame of an old photo he kept hidden in his drawer. 3 soldiers in desert fatigues, arms around each other, grins smeared with dust and sunburn. Their faces were frozen in youth, untouchable by time. Only one of them had survived. At dinner, he sat alone as usual. But the others glanced at him differently now. Not with pity, not even with curiosity. With regard. Like they were looking at someone whose story they didn't fully understand, but wanted to. Lexi returned later with a fresh pair of black gloves, just like he asked. "These ones are military spec," she said softly. "Grip support, reinforced palms." Walter didn't answer. Just slid his hands into them slowly, methodically, like a man dressing for duty. She watched him stare out the window again, eyes fixed on the base of the flagpole even when it wasn't time yet. "What did you mean, yesterday?" she asked. Finally. "You said 2 more to go." Walter blinked, like he hadn't realized she'd stayed. Then he nodded toward the photo sitting on his table. 3 of us deployed. Only I came home." "But you said—" "1 died instantly. 1 bled out beside me. I made it back, sort of." He tapped his legs. "Every year since I've stood for them, even when I couldn't. Every leg I lost is a name I carry, but I don't feel finished. Not yet." Lexi sat down. Then what would make it feel finished? They never got honors, no ceremonies. Their names were never etched anywhere permanent. I thought standing for them was enough. He paused. Now I'm not so sure. The next morning, OR 800 came and went. But Walter didn't rise. Not because he couldn't, because he was missing. The room was empty. Bed untouched. No nurse had seen him leave. Panic swept the ward. Security was alerted. Staff combed the halls. A wheelchair couldn't just vanish. They found him at 0817, outside, in the cold, at the base of the flagpole, standing. No chair, no nurse. No audience, just Walter Pierce, gripping the pole, both gloved hands pressed to metal, head bowed low. "Sir," the administrator said, stepping closer, "you're not authorized to be out here. And you're in danger of falling." Walter lifted his chin. "I came here to finish something." "Mr. Pierce?" "Sergeant," he interrupted. "Sergeant Walter Pierce." The administrator blinked, then saluted. Walter didn't salute back. He just looked at the pole, then past it. His voice cracked when he whispered, "They would have stood too, you know, if they had the chance." Lexi reached his side just as his arms began to tremble. She gripped one elbow, steadying him gently. "Let's get you inside." "Not yet," he said. "Not until they're remembered." That night, something changed. He asked for a typewriter. Yes, a typewriter. Not a laptop. Not a phone. A clunky, old-school Remington. The kind that clacked with every key press, and he began to write, page after page, names, ranks, locations, stories. Not just his, but theirs, because if no one else would remember them, he would. And in that room, under that flag, with gloves on, and ghosts in his chest, Walter Pierce was going to make them eternal. The rhythmic clack of the typewriter echoed through room 218 long past midnight. Nurses walked by without interrupting. Some paused, glanced through the doorway, and nodded silently. Lexi, who'd grown used to Walter's early silence, now found herself listening, each keystroke like a heartbeat. He typed like a man chasing time. Not frantic, but deliberate, determined, focused. By the end of the first night, 5 pages lay stacked beside the machine. The second night, there were 12. By the fourth, he'd filled a small box, not with fiction, with names, dates, units, lost birthdays, last phone calls, final words spoken over radio static. Lexi finally asked him gently, "Who are you writing to?" "Not to," Walter said, adjusting his gloves. "For." "For who?" "Anyone who thinks silence is what we left behind." She didn't press, but she stayed longer each time she came in. So did the others. An orderly named Nate brought him coffee. One of the dietitians slipped him oatmeal cookies and said, "My uncle served too." The custodian replaced the flickering hallway light outside his room without being asked. Walter noticed. He noticed everything. He had become more than a patient. He was now the pulse of the wing. Every morning, 0800 sharp, he stood, and every morning, more people joined him. First, it was Lexi, standing quietly beside his chair, hands behind her back. Then Nate. Then 2 residents from the East Wing who hadn't left their beds in months. By week's end, over a dozen people gathered at the window or in the hallway, some with hands on hearts, some just watching, some even humming along with the anthem. And Walter? He never said a word until the Friday meeting. The facilities director called a staff gathering in the rec room. He cleared his throat, holding a single sheet of paper. "We received something unexpected this morning," he began. "A letter from the Department of Defense." Heads turned. "It seems Mr. Pierce submitted a handwritten file, pages and pages of names, ranks, dates, along with a request." He looked at Walter. "He's asked that the base add these names to the National Fallen Warriors Registry. Most were never officially recognized, some were misclassified, a few were never recorded at all." A stunned silence. "And the department has agreed." Gasps, applause, even a few tears. Walter didn't stand for the announcement. He just looked at Lexi. "One more thing," he said. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a small cloth-wrapped object. Inside was a folded patch, faded, weathered, old. "That's not regulation," she said, puzzled. "It's not supposed to be." He turned it over. On the back was stitched one word, home. "We buried one of our boys with this." But it didn't stay buried. He handed it to her. "Sew it inside the flag when I go." Lexi's throat caught. "Go where?" Walter didn't answer. But the next morning, for the first time since his arrival, he didn't stand at 800. His chair was empty, and the flag still rose, but no one could quite explain the breeze that came through the closed window, or the 2 sets of footprints outside the pole. When Lexi entered room 218 that morning, it was like walking into a shrine. The bed was made with military precision, sheets tucked tight, corners sharp. On the table sat the typewriter, covered with a cloth. On top of it, a single envelope addressed, in neat, slanted handwriting, "To those who stood with me." There was no sign of Walter, no wheelchair, no gloves, no sound except the flagpole cable clicking faintly in the wind outside. The staff searched everywhere. Storage rooms, chapel, even the old records archive. Nothing. Lexi called every number she could find, regional VA centers, transport services, even nearby shelters, thinking maybe, just maybe, he had checked himself out. But no transfer had been processed, no discharge request. It was as if Sergeant Walter Pierce had simply disappeared. The envelope held the answer. Inside were 3 items. A folded sheet of typewriter paper with 38 names, including 2 marked with crosses. A photo of the Sycamore staff and veterans gathered by the window at 0800.3. A handwritten note. "You gave me back my mission. You gave them back their names. That's all I ever needed." Lexi stared at the note until her hands began to tremble. She remembered his words. 2 more to go. She had thought it was metaphor. Now she wasn't so sure. The director made an immediate decision. That weekend, they would hold a ceremony. Not for Walter's death, because they had no proof he had died, but for his legacy. They called it the standing hour. Word spread fast. Dozens of people showed up. Former soldiers, local news, the mayor, a family who had once received a folded flag but never knew the story behind it. Even an army chaplain who had served with Walter during the early years of the war. At 800 sharp, a bugler stepped forward. The anthem played, and this time, everyone stood, all of them, even patients who hadn't walked in years. Some were lifted, some leaned on walkers or nurses. But they stood, for him, for them, for names once lost. Lexi spoke at the microphone, voice cracking. He didn't need a statue. He just needed us to remember, to care, and to stand. After the ceremony, a staff member came running over with wide eyes. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "There's a man at the gate. He looks like him." People turned. But by the time Lexi reached the gate, there was no one there. Just a pair of black gloves resting on the stone walls and a note pinned underneath. "You stood, that's enough." That night, as the center went quiet, Lexi returned to room 218. She placed the gloves beside the typewriter. She folded the home patch and stitched it into the edge of the hallway's main flag with her own hands. And for the first time in years, she whispered, "Rest easy, Sergeant." She didn't know where Walter had gone, but she knew exactly what he had left behind. 2 weeks had passed since the gloves appeared at the gate. Since then, room 218 had remained untouched, by request, not out of protocol, but reverence. Walter Pierce had become something larger than a patient, a legend, the kind that didn't need a tombstone because the memory of him clung to the walls like fresh paint. Visitors asked for tours. Veterans stopped by the window where he once stood. Staff lowered their voices when they passed his door. But one place had not yet changed. The wall in the east corridor, the one where resident photos were normally hung, still stood blank. It had always been an afterthought, a place of smiling snapshots, retirement gifts, and faded "thank you for your service" frames. Lexi had an idea. It started with a single name, handwritten on a card, Placed at eye level, Corporal Julian Jules Reyes, KIA, 2009, one of the names from Walter's list. The next morning, 2 more appeared. By week's end, there were 14. Not photos, just names, neatly penned, framed in simple wood. Beneath, each one a line from Walter's files, something human, a joke, a habit, a song they loved. Sergeant Malik Carter once beat the whole unit at poker with a busted hand. P.T.R. Singh never missed Sunday pancakes no matter the base. SPC. Elena Ruiz carried a photo of her dog, not her boyfriend. It became a ritual. Each day, Lexi would add one, and each day, someone would stand before it, silently. No music, no speeches, just presence. One afternoon, the administrator pulled Lexi aside. "You know, we can't keep room 218 empty forever." She nodded. "I know. So, what do we do?" Lexi thought for a long moment, then replied, "We fill it." "With a new resident?" "No," she said, "with purpose." The next morning, room 218 wasn't listed as available. Instead, a new plaque was installed on the door, the standing room. In honor of those who stood when they couldn't inside, Walter's gloves remained on the shelf. The typewriter sat beneath a glass case with a loop of soft clicking playing overhead, recorded from one of his final nights. And on the wall, the full-typed list of 38 names, laminated and bold. Every morning at 0800, the intercom played the anthem. And every morning, one staff member stood watch in the room, sometimes in uniform, sometimes not. One morning, Lexi walked in to find a teenage boy standing there. She didn't recognize him. "Are you visiting someone?" she asked. He turned slowly, eyes misty. "My dad was on the list." She opened her mouth, but no words came. He continued. "We never knew anyone remembered. Until now." She walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "He's remembered." And then, quietly, they stood together as the music played. That night, Lexi found a small addition taped to the flag by the window, a final card. "Walter Pierce, Sergeant USA, he stood every day, so we could." The standing room had become more than a tribute. It had become sacred. Veterans came from across the state to see the names on the wall. Some brought medals, some brought stories. A few just stood in silence, hands trembling as they reached for names they'd never thought would be remembered by anyone but themselves. But everyone came for one reason: to stand. And at the center of it all, still beneath the glass, untouched, was Walter Pierce's old Remington typewriter. Lexi began a tradition. Every Monday at 800 she would read one name from the wall. Not just the rank and year, but something real, something only someone who cared would say. Sergeant Daniel Ruiz once gave away his only warm socks during a winter patrol. Said his boots were warmer anyway. Specialist Amy Tran could beat anyone at cards unless she was laughing, which she always was. Private First Class Cody LeMay, who wanted to be a pilot but joined infantry to follow his brother. Never told him that. The staff began doing the same. Even residents who couldn't speak, who barely moved, began nodding during each reading because they understood. It wasn't about Walter anymore. It was about the silence he refused to leave behind. Then one Thursday, something strange happened. A letter arrived at Sycamore. No return address. Just stamped in bold black letters. U.S. Army Archives Division. Inside, a single photo. Black and white. Dated. Faded, but unmistakable. Walter Pierce, in full uniform, younger, standing proudly in front of a small wooden memorial. Behind him, a row of boots, helmets, rifles, scrawled across the bottom, handwritten in familiar ink. "For every man who stood beside me, and every one who never got to, we carry them, until the end." Lexi held the photo like it might vanish, if she blinked. That weekend, she had it framed and placed above the typewriter, and below it, a new sign. He stood for them. Now we stand for all. The standing room began receiving donations, flags, patches, boots, even old letters from families. The center turned it into a living archive, not of war, but of remembrance. One day, an elderly woman came in with 2 young girls. She walked directly to the list and placed a gold star sticker next to one of the names. Lexi approached. "Was he your husband?" she asked gently. "My brother," the woman whispered. "We never got to say goodbye." "You just did," Lexi replied. The woman didn't cry. She stood, because that was what Walter taught them. You don't need rank to honor. You don't need medals to matter. You just need to stand. At 800 the next morning, the anthem played again, and as the music rose, something unusual happened. A power surge flickered the lights. Just a blink, no big deal. But every staff member in the hall would later swear, for a split second, in the reflection of the window, they saw a man standing tall, old jacket, gloves on, no chair, and just behind him, 2 shadows, one to the left, one to the right, all 3. Saluting, and then, gone. But the wind at the flagpole that morning blew harder than it had in years, and no one ever missed the anthem again. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember that some heroes never leave.